To talk more on this, we are joined by Mr. Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst from Bradenton, Florida, and also Mr. Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to the program. Now, let's start with Mr. Larry Johnson. Mr. Johnson, what is stalling the ceasefire talks? The West says it's Hamas, the Palestinians say it's Netanyahu, and now with what we see in the West Bank, and Netanyahu's recent public address presenting a map that had no West Bank, it seems that the regime is just buying time and wants to continue with the removal of the entire Palestinians.
Yeah, that's their goal, the extension of the Palestinians. They want to wipe them out from Gaza and from the West Bank. So I think people need to come to grips with the reality that the Zionist government of Netanyahu has absolutely no interest whatsoever in negotiating a settlement. That it's not like that there's there's a foundation for an agreement here, because Israel is not going to coexist with the Palestinians. At least this current crowd that's around Netanyahu, with people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they've made that very clear. It's a racist policy, it's a genocidal policy, but that's where they're going. So if the Hamas leaders are somehow holding out hopes that there's going to be some sort of magical intervention by the West that will compel Israel to make concessions, it's not going to happen.
That's right. Mr. Johnson, how much of all of this is the U.S. to blame, especially when you see Washington supposedly pushing for peace while funneling millions of U.S. Taxpayer money to fuel the war on Gaza at the same time, and now, as we see, the occupied West Bank as well?
Well, it's because Israel has bought and owns the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government, essentially. You're correct that the United States has it in its power that if they cut off the funding to Israel and they stop supplying the weapons, the Israelis would be compelled to negotiate and reach a settlement with the Palestinians. But that's not going to happen. The Biden administration's not cutting it off, and if Donald Trump's elected, he's not going to cut it off. So Israel's got sort of that guaranteed source of funding going forward. The problem Israel faces is internal, because there is a deep split between some of the senior military and intelligence officials and these extreme Zionists that are pushing to exterminate all Palestinians. His retired Israeli generals are predicting that this could lead to the complete implosion of Israel within a year if they don't alter the course they're on.
That's right. Mr. Johnson, I think we have Mr. Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, also with us from Bristol. Mr. Gosling, glad you can make it. Mr. Gosling, I asked this question from Mr. Johnson. I wanted your opinion as well. What is stalling the ceasefire talks? I told Mr. Johnson that the West says it's Hamas, the Palestinians say it's Netanyahu, but what we see on the ground, especially in the West Bank right now, and Netanyahu's recent public address, which he presented a map, which had no West Bank, it seems that the regime is just buying time, maybe for Trump to come into power. I don't know. I want your opinion, and wants to continue with the removal of entire Palestinians. Just remove Palestine altogether.
Yeah, I mean, the alteration of the map of the Middle East seems to be a bit of a game that the British and the Israelis have played really over the last 100 years. They seem to think they can just draw lines in the sand wherever they feel like it, and anybody that's in the way will just be bulldozed, literally, and massacred. But I noticed today Gallant, who's with Netanyahu, is possibly going to be issued with an arrest warrant by the International Court of Justice. He's saying today we have to pull out the roots in the West Bank. So he's talking about uprooting the indigenous people. Now, of course, this is racist. It's a war crime. The whole world can see what's going on. But still, Netanyahu is saying that it's Hamas that's blocking a ceasefire. amazingly, much of the Western media just repeats this without questioning whether there's any basis in rationality, because actually the Israelis themselves have said that they don't want a ceasefire. Publicly they say they do, privately they say they don't, because it's been being blocked from having a ceasefire because of the terms of Netanyahu. So as they get close to a ceasefire, so the far right bloc in Israel, mainly led by Netanyahu, is shifting the goalposts. So you can't make a deal with people like this. It's quite obvious that if there were even to be a temporary ceasefire and some hostages would be exchanged, some prisoners freed or whatever, that when it was convenient to Netanyahu, that he would just start the war again. They've made that clear. It's only going to be a pause. Or the massacre. It would start the massacre, the genocide again. So you can't really make a deal under those circumstances. And he is really the reason why. I mean, he's calling the Hamas representatives, the Palestinians, the ones blocking it, but he clearly is the one who's doing it. Look, the main problem I think here is the Gnostic and other parts of Judaism that these people in the far right have picked up on. I mean, obviously this is also part of the Christian Zionist movement in Britain that created the Israeli state and was part of it in the first place by getting hold of that land off the Ottoman Turks all that time ago. But they are into these books of the Zohar, the Kabbalah, the Talmud, and not the basic stuff, which is we all agree on in the Abrahamic faith, which is the Torah, you know, and of course the words of Yahweh, the God of the Torah, which Muslims and Jews and Christians should all agree on. But what they're doing is they're just focusing on these Gnostic and Kabbalistic books, and they're trying to say that this is Judaism. Of course, it's not. It's an inversion of the faith that they proclaim themselves. And in fact, they're talking, and they have been really ever since the English Civil War and the beginnings of Freemasonry, about rebuilding this third temple. What I'd like to know is when they rebuild the third temple, are the Christians and other faiths going to endorse the sacrifice in that third temple of sheep and cattle? Is that going to be endorsed by these other faiths? Of course it won't be, you know, because this is a reversion away from, I mean, particularly in the Christian world, the Christian Zionists should look at that and shudder and say, no, that's not Christian. Christ came along to overturn all that Old Testament stuff. So I think what we are starting to see develop is an understanding around the world, inside and outside of the faith, of the duplicity and the lies being told again and again by these nihilistic Zionists led by Netanyahu.
That's right. Mr. Gosling, I think we had Rabbi Weiss on the program as well. He was so adamant on saying that there should be a separation between the Jewish and Zionism, which is very, very important, as you mentioned as well. Mr. Johnson, from what Mr. Gosling mentioned, some of the problems, I want your opinion. What would it take for this genocidal war to come to an end? How long is this going to continue for? And at what price?
Well, there are a couple of dynamics at work. The Israeli military is exhausted. Yeah, if the United States continues to fund them and arm them, yeah, they will be able to continue to fight and kill. But you notice that the pace of operations over the last couple of weeks, since that missile exchange with Hezbollah 2 weeks ago, that the pace of operations have slackened somewhat. What could really make a difference is if China, Russia, and really the BRICS nations, along with Turkey, got together and imposed sanctions on Israel comparable to what was done to South Africa during the apartheid period. That Israel has to be treated as a pariah and left in a position where maybe the United States would be the only one who would deal with it. But still, at this point, the Brits, the French, the Germans, and the Americans, and so most of NATO, with the exception of Turkey, are standing solidly behind Israel. So that, I said, the killing's not going to stop. they're not going to win this militarily, either side. And that's what even the Israeli generals or the chief spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force admitted 3-4 weeks ago, that we can't defeat Hamas. Hamas is an idea. And the irony is that as the Israelis have killed more civilians, the number of recruits into Hamas, people willing to join up and now risk their lives, has increased, not diminished. So I think, unfortunately, we're in for a long, protracted struggle. There's no end in sight.
Mr. Gosling, your thoughts as well about what Mr. Johnson said, and you need a new, as I say, new alliance to counter the collective West.
Well, look, I think it's very interesting what's been going on within the West. We've even had Biden getting annoyed with Netanyahu over the last week or so. And here in Britain, we've had some measures by the British Foreign Office which are very annoying for Netanyahu, particularly withdrawing the British objections to the arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gaza, and also, of course, stopping 10% of all the arms shipments coming from Britain just this week. So, there are fractures appearing in the Western so-called alliance backing this genocide, but also, of course, more importantly in many ways, within Israel itself, in civic society. We've seen the demonstration after the deaths of these hostages of 500,000 Israelis out on the streets demanding Netanyahu go. Now, of course, this means that he would, I can remember reporting, I think it was in 2017, on the charges against him in the Israeli courts. He managed to get the law changed, giving himself a bit of immunity. And unlike Trump, in my opinion, Netanyahu really is guilty of fraud, and he's likely to go to jail. So he's really fighting for his own career. So I think that the interesting developments are likely to take place within Israel itself. So within the opposition, but also within this right-wing coalition that's there. There are people who would like to see Netanyahu out and take his job. And so it's possible that we'll see some shifting of the political plates, tectonic plates within Israel to make his position more. Every time Netanyahu tells more lies to the world, the Israeli leadership, and particularly people around the Knesset and the press, get exasperated with him quietly. But at some point, it's going to break. This cannot carry on forever. Netanyahu can't tough it out like a sort of Chicago gangster trying to keep all of his ducks in the line and all of his followers together. He can't carry on like this forever because there are other people that want his job.
On that note, I would like to thank both of our guests, Mr. Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol, and also Mr. Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst from Bradenton, Florida. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And with that, we come to the end of this news review section. Thank you, dear viewers, for being with us.